the truth is, lest somebody say, oh, you're forcing all these guys to preach and who are you? Only God, does that. That's true. It's true. But there are a lot of needs when it comes to teaching. We need people to teach Bible class.
Yeah.
We need dads who are willing to do devotionals for Sunday nights when youth group comes over. We need people, women, men, we need people who can share in a public way. One of the speakers that we took the boys to at Proclaim made a really good point that I hadn't thought. And he told them, regardless of what you do, if you have the ability to stand up in front of a group and say something, you're going to be blessed because of that.
Something happened
in the midst of this culture.
What you're describing, your experience is all of a sudden now.
And it's an intentional journey.
And that end is relationship with God.
Well, guys, thank you all so much for joining us today on Faith in the Folds. It is a treat to have two of my favorite ministers from the Collegeside Church of Christ in Cookeville, Tennessee. I won't say who the other favorites are. I only know one other one, so there's that. But, Suggs, sorry, man, you didn't make it this time. But good to have both of you guys here with us. John Nichols and Matt Collins joining us from Cookeville, Tennessee. John, welcome back to the podcast. How have you been, sir?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed our last time and looking forward to this discussion today as well.
Yeah. Matt, you and I met originally at a Smokies game, right?
That's true. Tennessee Smokies game in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's
Smokies. Yeah.
Right.
And we both happened to have a familiar acquaintance, right? AKA my brother,
your brother,
who's a deacon at a church across town there. We won't mention him because he can get a big head sometimes,
No need for it.
Right? Don't need to feed the beast there. But anyway, guys, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have y'all here. I have the feeling that even though we're starting out somewhat formal, by the end of it, we're all going to be in stitches, and that's going to be great because that kind of stuff really, really plays well. Yeah. But before we get into what I want to talk about today, let's have some introductions. John and Matt, can y'all tell us kind of how long have you been in ministry? Maybe give us the 10 peso version of how you got to where you are today, and help us get to know you before we dig into what we're going to talk about today.
You want me to start, Matt?
Go ahead.
I have been in full-time ministry for, I guess, about 17 or 18 years. Started really young and really knew all my life that it's what I wanted to do. And even maybe down a layer from that, I always kind of knew that I wanted to preach and teach. And so in God's good grace, I have been in Cookeville for all of those years in full-time ministry. I did serve a place before I moved here in a part-time capacity when I was in school, and met my wife here. We were married, and I've been at a couple of different places here in Cookeville. And because I always knew I wanted to preach, there was kind of a progression in terms of having those opportunities and challenges. So I've been at the Collegeside Church for over 4 years now, not quite 5, as the teaching minister. Mm-hmm. It has been just an incredible, challenging, beautiful, difficult opportunity. And I love it. Wouldn't do anything else. And really and truly, I mean, unless the Lord just made it known, I don't want to do it anywhere else. And so these are my people, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to preach every week what the Lord puts on my heart.
Yeah. You mentioned specifically your title is teaching minister. Does that kind of give us a clue of sort of how either you see your role or how your elders see your role?
Really both. It initially was their choice. that's what they came up with when I was approached about this opportunity. And really what that means, by and large, it means what the preaching and teaching ministry in most churches means.
Yeah.
But the added responsibility is some formation in our Bible class program.
Yeah.
And so different educational opportunities. And so I oversee the curriculum on our adult level. And that's a challenge. It's different than preaching and teaching, but they really wanted me to focus on preaching and teaching, but also they wanted to focus on more of the pastoral responsibility. They wanted it to be known that that was their responsibility, not mine, which is why they chose the title.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, preacher tends to have a certain connotation where, yes, you preach, right, on Sunday mornings, and in certain churches, right, Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, nursing homes on Sunday afternoons, stuff like that. But then also the expectation that, well, you're going to be the first call, right, for any kind of pastoral visitation. That's challenging especially when you have a congregation size of Collegesides. Yeah. Right. Challenging to be able to give everybody, sufficient time and care. So, well, cool. I was curious, with a title like teaching minister, one could maybe not understand. It's like, so do you preach? Or, like I'll get questions too, like, hey, you're the discipleship minister. Well, what does that mean? It's like, well, okay, imagine an associate minister, right? But with a more biblical title. And
that's right. That's right. Amen.
And there you go. Yeah. So, Matt, tell us about you, sir. How did you come to have such a glorious beard and work alongside characters like John and others?
Well, I'll give my father all the credit for my beard, but none of the credit for my current employment. So he's I've been in youth ministry for 11 years, and started out in Nashville, and worked there. Got a cold call from a guy named John Nichols about 8 years ago, probably actually a little bit over 8 years ago now, and had never met him, didn't know him. And he was inquiring about an opportunity that could be in front of me in Cookeville. And so my wife and I talked, and we met with them, and John and I became friends really over the phone. We talked on the phone a lot for a couple of months, and wound up moving to Cookeville, and have been here ever since, and have been with John. We worked at a different congregation together for a couple of years. And I've been at Collegeside for just about 3. After at the end of this year will be completed my 3rd year here. And we had an opportunity to come to Collegeside, and honestly, I joke around with John a lot, but one of the biggest reasons that we came is because we wanted John to be our preacher, and we wanted him to be the preacher of our girls. And so we made the decision to come across town to be here with Collegeside, and it was has proven to be the absolute right decision for us and for our family. So I've been in youth ministry for about 11 years now, and kicking and screaming, still here. So who knows what'll happen next, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I hear about a lot of that kicking and screaming too from our from the He Who Shall Not Be Named, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So also known as Voldemort, but we never call him. So that would feel weird to start now. Guys, before we even get into what we're going to talk about, I'm interested, John, in what you had said earlier, that you had just always kind of known that you wanted to be a preacher, that you wanted to do congregational ministry. It strikes me so fascinating because were you to ask me even 7 or 8 years ago, let alone 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, hey, do you want to be a congregational minister? I would have said no. And so let me just ask, John, but also Matt, you as well. How did you guys know? Like, what did people affirm that in you? Did you just always have a sense like, this is where I need to go, this is what I need to do? Like, how did y'all come to that conclusion? And how did other people say, hey, this is something you should really think about? I feel like the Lord is kind of pushing you in this direction.
I get asked that question quite a bit. And at first, the question was surprising, to just be honest, because I assumed that it worked this way for everybody. But what I found out is that, in fact, I am kind of in the minority in terms of knowing.
Mm.
I don't want to suggest that there was never a time when I thought about doing something else, because there certainly has been those times where other options were on the table. However, I've always known, and really there's probably three reasons. That sounds like a preacher, doesn't it? There's three
Do they all
reasons.
start with the same letter?
They
do
do.
not.
Yeah.
I think alliteration is anti-biblical. Now there really
And
are.
here,
There's about three reasons that led me to know. One was I was always drawn to the biblical text. I enjoyed Bible class and study, and I just enjoyed it. That I didn't have to be pushed. I didn't have to, I wasn't kicking and screaming, and so I always just really enjoyed that. That sounds noble. I'm not trying to sound noble.
Such a saint.
Yeah,
mhm.
but I did enjoy it. The other thing was, the second and third thing are really the reasons, mostly, and they're tied together. I had a natural knack for public speaking. Not a perfect public speaker, but I enjoyed public speaking in many other ways. I always have. And the church that I grew up in really leveraged that for ministry. And so I had people around me that said, you enjoy doing this. There's something there, that can be refined if you say yes to the Lord, to what we feel like the Lord's given you. Then you could do ministry. And sure enough, I did. And that looked a lot of different ways. It looked like, sweet old ladies in Bible study saying, hey, John, read this scripture read the story for today. It was preachers who said, let's write sermons together. Let me show you it was professors at Lipscomb, at other places, at Freed Hardeman, on the graduate level, who just shared with me. And it was mentors, even still today, to this day, mentors who say, hey, John, keep going.
Yeah.
So God has used his people to push me in that direction and keep me on that path. And frankly, and we're going to get into this in a little while, I think, over the last couple of years, it's not been people pushing me in ministry, it's been people keeping me in ministry, keeping me on that path that God has used to refine that vision for ministry in my own heart. So those are the three things. And I know this is what God wants me to do, at least for this season of my life.
Yeah. Matt, when did you realize that you had reached the apex of your maturation at the high school level and decided that was where you were going to minister? Is that how?
Yeah, that's what happened. I'm the same guy I was then, and so I figured if I'm going to top out at 16, I might as well talk to 16-year-olds the rest of my life.
That's fair. Yeah.
No, I actually started out if you would ask me growing up, I would have told you I wanted to be a sports writer. I love sports. I can't play them, so I like to watch them, and I like to write. And so I actually, as a high school student, I wrote for our school newspaper. I wrote for the Mount Juliet Chronicle, which is a little city newspaper we had. It cost you nothing to get one of those deals,
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote for, I wrote about sports, high school sports, for our high school and stuff like that. So that was interesting to me. I would have told you, then I was going to go to college and go to journalism school and become a writer for, ESPN or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And really, a lot of things began to change for me when I was told by my minister, hey, you've got a gift. and use that gift. And so I was really pushed towards it by people, or encouraged in it by people who cared about me and loved me and saw something in me that, frankly, I didn't or wouldn't have seen in myself. I was provided with opportunities, and I was encouraged to take advantage of them, and so I did. And so that was part of it, and then the other part of it was my best friends all wanted to go to the same Christian college, and so at that point, I said, let's all go." So we all went together, and we were roommates together, and so it was, a lot of it was people, ministers at my home church that pushed me towards it and said, "Hey, you can do this. You've got a gift for this, and let's provide you opportunities to use that gift, and we think you can do something with it." And so that was it. And what led me to youth ministry was I had never had a desire to preach. John always knew that. That wasn't my story, not my story. I had a great experience in our youth group growing up, and we had a fairly large youth ministry where I grew up, and I really enjoyed being part of it. My best friends were all in it. They were at school together and church together, and that was kind of my people. And really, it was, I wanted to, if I could create an environment for students that was similar to what I had growing up, that was kind of what I wanted to do. And so that's what led me towards youth ministry, and that's where I've been this whole time.
Yeah. In some ways, I'm envious of the certainty that, at least now looking back, maybe hindsight's 2020, but at least some of the certainty it seems that you both had. And John, Matt, especially since once you realize, maybe not sports writing, right? Maybe youth ministry. My initial expectation as a junior in high school was to go to Lipscomb University with my best friend at the time from church. We were both going to be youth ministry majors because, Matt, like you said, I had a good experience in my youth group and really enjoyed it. And it was fun and spiritually transformational and all that. And then eventually it just didn't sit right with me. After a lot of prayer, Harding made the most sense. I had the most peace about it. But decided I was going to teach high school history and social studies. Well, I had A-level aspirations and C-level work ethic, so you can kind of calculate my undergraduate GPA there, right? I had 4.0 expectations and 2.0 work ethic, and eventually realized that what I wanted to do was some kind of teaching, right? So I'm somewhat envious of guys who seem like they had a straighter path to where they are. But looking back on it now, I kind of know that or I can tell, at least in God's grace, I needed that time to figure it out. And now that I have young kids, I realize that that's what good parents do. Sometimes they just need to let their kids have time to figure it out. I won't throw my 6-year-old under the bus, but last night was rough, and he just needed time to figure out what he needed to do to get ready for bed.
Been there. Yeah.
Yep. So guys, ministry feels a little different these days on this side of the pandemic. Not that COVID doesn't still get people from time to time, but ministry feels a little different. And a lot of ministers I talk with, ministers of all kinds, and even ministers I hear from who are in fellowships outside of churches of Christ, they kind of say the same things too. The ministry just feels different. Have y'all noticed that? And let me ask, why do you think that is? What's going on? Is ministry harder these days than it was 3 years ago? What do y'all think?
I don't know that I would say it's harder. I think that might suggest that it was easier before the pandemic, or it was
That's fair.
before the pandemic. Certainly it's different. I think it's harder in many ways. And I think maybe in a way or two, it's actually easier. Now, I can only speak anecdotally from our own experience.
Sure.
And I think it's worth noting that our experience is different than a lot of other churches, the experience of a lot of other churches. And really, in one major way, Collegeside is a very, very young church. And so fortunately, we did not have to have the same level of concern through the pandemic because we don't have just a tremendous number of older folks. And so that changes things, and it should, some considerations, have to be made in those ways. And so that kind of, I think we were fortunate in that way. So that certainly shaped our experience. I say all that to say we came back really early. We were off for a couple of weeks there at the very beginning, and we came back very early. And so through the whole pandemic, kind of our posture has been, we want to do as much as we can.
Sure.
So I think that's worth noting. I think the way that it's harder, at least from my vantage point, has been not just the growth, but almost the pull to isolationism. Because initially it was necessary. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And even once we came back to a formal assembly, there was no ministry to speak of.
Sure.
It was, we really lagged with Bible classes formally, ministry opportunities, small groups. We had big, but we didn't do a lot of the smaller things. And so isolation was pushed. And rightfully so. And I think that to a great extent that took hold in the hearts of a lot of people. I think it gave rise to a lot of people the feeling of permission to some of those more, what I would say are negative impulses even that existed before the pandemic. There are, I'm forced extrovert, but I'm introverted dispositionally on my own. And I'll be honest, staying at home, I loved it. I did. I loved it. But it's not good for me. It's not good for anybody. And so I think a lot of people were given permission to be closed. And I think pushing through that has been a difficulty. Even still, even this long after the initial wave came, there are still so many people. They may be with us on Sunday, but they're closed to church involvement, to church family. They're closed to participation, and God calls introverts to participate. He calls all of us to be a part of the family. That looks different, certainly. And so I think pushing through permission that people felt has been the most difficult thing for me. And I'll let Matt talk, but I do have one other difficulty just from a preacher's perspective that I'll share in a little while.
Yeah. Matt, what about you? How about in the world of youth ministry?
Yeah, honestly, for me, it's hard for me to answer that question really well, because I started at Collegeside January the 1st of 2020.
I forgot about that.
So that was my first day in the office was January 2nd. And so I never really got off the ground here before everything shut down. And so for me, all that I've known at this church is the past 3 years. I don't have any experience prior to 2020 at Collegeside to know what youth ministry looked like here before. And so it's not, I don't know that it's fair for me to compare my youth ministry at a different congregation, to this one, because they're different places. And so for me, it's hard to say specifically about Collegeside. how it's harder or easier or whatever, because my experience is, for us, we had a couple of months and then that was it. Um, and then
Yeah.
everything happened, that happened. And so, um, as far as, holistically, maybe a couple of things, my experience at Collegeside has been, it doesn't feel that different.
Okay. Yeah.
When we had to make some modifications, certainly, at the beginning of things. We met, outside, and we did, Bible study outside every week, from basically June to October of 2020. But really, once we got back, like we came back,
Yeah.
and for the most part, our families, the overwhelming majority of our families were ready to roll.
Yeah.
And so we didn't face a lot of, pushback or anything with the pandemic, as far as being together. We tried to create appropriate spaces to be together when it was necessary. But once we were back, and to me, it really kind of felt like this is what it's youth ministry has always been, right? And so, we were in Bible study together, and we were having events together, and spending time together, and we really didn't miss a whole lot of togetherness. Now, some of that togetherness was shaped in different ways,
Sure.
but we didn't miss a whole lot of it. We did. We really, my experience at Collegeside as a youth minister has been, shaped by COVID in some ways, certainly, but in a lot of ways, it has just felt like youth ministry,
Yeah.
frankly. And so that's, if in my opinion, I guess that's been a good thing. We've not had to deal with a lot of, poor situations or things. So we've been lucky in that regard.
Yeah. You and I are similar in respects of landing at churches right around the time of when the pandemic starting. So you said January 2020 was when you landed at Collegeside. We
Right.
moved from Central Kentucky down to Corpus Christi in August of 2020, and I had actually come down here in, I think, June to kind of check everything out. And it was wild starting a new job, like moving across country and starting a new job at a new church. It's still when we were having to be cautious about, what's, like who, like, or we got to make sure that we fog everything after it gets used and wipe everything down and all that stuff. I feel like this was my perception, and I wasn't here at the time, but it was my perception that in Corpus Christi, the wave of COVID hit a little later. Corpus Christi is really kind of out of the way. I mean, we're 3 hours away from Mexico. We're really far south, and the interstate doesn't even extend all the way from Houston to Corpus Christi. It's like, it's kind of like Texas forgets we're here. And, it seemed like it took a while for some of the harder hits of COVID to get down to us. And we were moving right in the middle of that. And I was also asked to do some things by our elders that my predecessor, that it was largely not his responsibility to do. And so, what my work looked like here had not totally been done before. There was some obvious overlap with adult education, but other things like that. For me, it was kind of like, okay, I don't have here's how we always done it to model to go by. John, you said that you had something else that you wanted to mention. It now feels like a good time to bring that up.
Yeah, just all the video stuff.
Yeah.
I thought preachers probably felt that most succinctly. And I had never spent a lot of time in front of a camera. And so that was a learning curve, frankly, that we had to, learn really quickly.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other thing that is of a more personal nature that I'm sure, you guys can relate to, and maybe some of your listeners can relate to, is at some point, I can't tell you exactly when, I had to stop giving myself permission to not do my job.
Yeah.
Now, certainly it's different. And so what I mean by that is you can't go to the hospital, but that doesn't get you off the hook from taking care of your people pastorally.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And just because you can't make a home visit doesn't mean that you can't reach out.
Mhm.
And I had found myself in this place for a lot of reasons, probably because the world was crazy, right? I had found myself I was giving myself permission to just preach in front of a camera
Mhm.
and not do anything else. And the Lord had to wake me up out of that really quickly. And it was him. I certainly didn't wake myself up. And even still, expectations have changed. It feels weird to go in the hospital, even now. The expectations have changed from the administration at the hospital. The expectations have changed from ministers, but also the expectations of people have changed. And so I guess this ties to what I was saying before. There are a lot of people who don't want to be visited.
Mm.
And we're coming from a time, at least in a town like we live in, which is still kind of Southern charm,
Cookville's not a small city, right? But it feels, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
it kind of feels like
yes,
a
it's a
tighter
hometown.
community. It
Yeah,
feels maybe culturally more rural than
yes,
certainly,
Mhm.
than
what
it
you'd
is.
find in Nashville, right?
Yeah, or even
Mhm.
than it currently is. I mean, we really have grown from rural to more, suburban,
Mhm.
even since I've been here in
Mhm.
17 years. But um, the expectation when somebody passes or when you're sick, people are going to come to your house and they're going to bring food and they're going to do all of these things to show you that they love you.
Mhm.
What I learned was there are a lot of people who don't want that, but there are people who do.
Yeah.
And so COVID was certainly an element that brought more complexity to the evaluation in my mind for how do we do this. So just practically, there were a lot of difficulties and challenges that arose, and even we still feel the effects of. Again, very fortunate and feel like God has led us every step of the way, but it's certainly been difficult.
Sure. Yeah. You've mentioned especially the technology aspect. I've said this before that, it seemingly overnight, preachers had to become TV producers.
Absolutely.
I suddenly had to realize or figure out, how do I use this free movie editing software I have on my computer, right?
Right.
Maybe this microphone on my headphones is actually useful for something
That's right.
besides just phone calls. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, guys, I like getting the kind of the insight into maybe how some things were different at Collegeside than elsewhere. I know, John, you specifically mentioned Collegeside as a young church in terms of demographics, right? Not necessarily in terms of age of the congregation, like how long the congregation's been there, but you'll have you're called Collegeside because you're right across the street from Tennessee Tech. And
That's
so, those differences made a difference in how you addressed everything. Whereas, other churches I know are still cautious because they have an older population, an older demographic that they serve. Also interesting that you phrase it this way. You had to stop giving yourself permission to not do your job. If I quoted that correctly. I saw just yesterday or 2 days ago, a minister friend of mine who commented on Facebook just how nice it is to be able to do all of the things that we hadn't really felt like we were able to do, especially in the height of the pandemic. But as folks have kind of gradually come back out of it, we've begun to realize, we now no longer need permission to do the things that we should be doing.
That's right.
to kind of flip it on its head there, we can do these things. If we need to be cautious, right? Especially if like flu season's coming up. Yeah, okay, right. We get all that. And some of those things are helping to knock the rust off of COVID. I heard about something cool that y'all did. I don't know if y'all were the heads of it or what, but tell me about Proclaim Ministry Camp and what all y'all have done with that. And it just sounds like a neat opportunity to want to knock off the rust of COVID, but also to maybe help some folks understand their calling in ministry. I don't know. I don't know much about it. Tell me about it.
John, me or you?
Go ahead.
So Proclaim was an idea that was not birthed by us. John and I were we led it here, but it was something that we morphed together from our individual experiences as teenagers. John can share about what he had, but I grew up and our congregation put on it wasn't a ministry camp at all. It's actually a camp. They called it Chisel. It was a 48-hour experience. And it was, we want to take our teenagers and show them how they can do ministry without being a paid minister. Mm-hmm. And so we would go and we would meet with people in various walks of life and jobs, and they would show us how they do ministry, but they're not on church staff. And so that was something that was really formational for me as that started when I was probably 16 or 17 years old. And so the last couple of years in high school, and then I actually participated as a college student for a couple of summers in that. It was open for high schoolers and college students at our church. And so that was a way to show people, hey, you can do ministry even if you never get a check from the church. Mm-hmm. And so that was something I grew up with, and John had a different camp experience. I'll let him share about that, but we really wanted to blend these two together. John, tell us about what you did.
I grew up at the Pennington Bend sponsored Future Preachers Training Camp, and it's kind of what's the phrase? The granddaddy of them all. It was the first preachers camp that was at least mainstream. I don't know that it necessarily was actually the first, although I think it might be. Mm-hmm. But for decades, the Pennington Bend Church, it sits right across from Opryland in Nashville, in the Pennington Bend, Donaldson community. Yep. Kind of backs up on its back to the Hermitage community, and kind of a
on the other side of the river.
That's right, mm-hmm. on the other side of the river. And so one of their major missional, they wouldn't have used that term probably, but one of their major missional thrusts was to train young men for ministry. Mm-hmm. And just recently, just a few months ago, we had an anniversary and celebration where some of us went, and they had pictures on the wall. They've stopped just recently in the last 6 or 7 years doing the camp. But there were pictures on the wall from years gone by. And I was reading the names, and I grew up going to this camp and I was shocked at the number of names of men in our fellowship in Churches of Christ that I know of, professors at many of our Christian universities, presidents of Christian universities, preachers, and so it's just an incredible thing. I grew up going from the time I was 13 or 14 to Pennington Bend one week during the summer, and it was Sunday to Sunday. You slept at the church. They had showers at the church, not hot water, cold water only. It was actually outdoor showers.
They might have grabbed it from the river.
That's what they might have.
Yeah, they did.
And in addition to the church family that I grew up in, one of the single biggest reasons that I do what I do now, just a lot of confidence that came from that opportunity. And kind of as a response to my own experience, I just felt a real conviction to train young men to do it. And I I have a vision to put men into ministry formally, to put men into ministry. You can serve the Lord and not do this for a living, but certainly there are many opportunities for people, men and women, to serve in vocational ministry full time, and I want to be a part of that. For many reasons, we've gotten away from that in our fellowship, and I think it's one of the bright spots from our past. Training and educating and pushing people into ministry. That's one of the reasons that I think the Churches of Christ grew the way that they did.
Yeah,
And
I
for a
think
lot of
so.
reasons, we've gotten away from it. So that was why I wanted to do that. And in talking with Matt, we kind of wanted to combine the two, and it was an incredible 3.5 to 4 day period with our young men here at Collegeside.
So what'd you do with those guys at
So
Proclaim?
we one of the strengths of the camp that Matt grew up going to, a camp, I guess not the right word, the opportunity that Matt had that he spoke about earlier, what were going around and seeing how other people minister who are not preachers. And even in some areas where it's either bivocational or just on the side or whatever. And so we wanted to add that element where we took some field trips, but I also had the heart where I want to train these guys how to look at the Bible, interpret the Bible, and apply the Bible in a public way.
Yeah.
And so we every day met with different people who were serving the Lord in different ways. And so we went to Nashville and met with a college president. We went to Healing Hands International. We had those opportunities throughout the time that we spent with them. We went to a funeral home. They got to talk to a funeral director, talk to a Christian counselor.
Yeah.
Wanted them to be exposed to those ways, but also spent time with hermeneutics, exegesis, communicating the gospel every day. Split them into groups. They drew out a text, a biblical text. They didn't get to pick, and we didn't assign it. They drew out a biblical text, and they were on the hook to write a sermon that they would deliver at the end of our time. And so we put them into groups with different staff members that we had. We walked them through some interpretation and some hermeneutics and some communication strategies after we'd had big group teaching on that. And then at the end of the week, Saturday night, all 18 young men preached a sermon. For many of them, it was the first time that they had ever preached a sermon. Wow. 17 of the 18 young men said, we gave them a choice, and they said, we want to do this in front of the church. We want to do this for the church. And so we did 8 or 9, I can't remember, the next day. And then over a period of the following weeks, one young man would get up and preach every week in our assembly. Collegeside's a large church. And so that was the first opportunity that many of them had to share those lessons. And just an incredible testimony to the future, God's activity in the hearts of young men, and just, it was an incredible thing.
Yeah. Were these students from Collegeside, like all from Collegeside?
All of them. Yes.
Wow.
All of them from Collegeside.
Yeah. Matt, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, not only did it impact our students, but if you were to ask our church body collectively, it's something that has reverberated throughout the whole community, of Collegeside. I had 4 days ago, this past Sunday, I had an older gentleman come up to me, and we have been done. Like the young men have presented their sermons; they're done doing that. So that part of is over. This camp happened in July, and I had an older gentleman tell me on Sunday, "Hey, I want you to know that that proclaim that y'all did is the best thing I've seen a church do in my entire life."
Wow.
And he's still thinking about it, still talking about it. And it's been months since we did it. And so it's something that, what we hope produces some fruit that we see, and maybe we fruit that we don't see, right? But it's something that our church family really, really clung to, once they saw what it was doing. So,
Yeah.
best thing I've been a part of as a vocational minister, bar none.
Yeah.
Any event or series or special occasion, you can throw it all up there. In my 11 years, and proclaim was the best I've been a part of on this side of things.
Yeah.
We are
Go
currently
ahead.
we're currently in discussions with our campus minister. We have a large campus ministry here at Collegeside because we are, as you said, across from Tennessee Tech. I
Mhm.
think the plan right now is to do basically the same thing on spring break for college students.
Wow.
Right.
And
Man, that's
the
good.
Lord has put in my heart training, and I wish everybody could go to a Christian school. Everybody doesn't have that opportunity.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so if we can give them just a little bit of training, I think God can utilize that in churches in the future. I hope to put people into formal ministry, full-time ministry.
Mhm.
I think we will, but God will use it in a lot of other ways, even if that
Mhm.
doesn't happen. And I just it was an eye-opening, incredible opportunity.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That sounds really neat. I know that there's a Bible professor at Harding who's also a preacher at one of the larger churches there in town, who has done something essentially similar to what y'all are doing. He calls it the Keruso experience. For those who are not familiar, the word Keruso is a Greek word for I preach or proclaim. And he draws, they kind of draw young men from around the central Arkansas area to do essentially what y'all are doing, and then they get to have same kinds of experiences. It's not from one particular congregation, though. They draw from a larger region, but
Mhm.
it is for high school students. And I remember thinking, when I first heard about it, it's like, oh, would I have enjoyed that? I think maybe I would have, but I don't know. John, you mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to, if that's okay. Because I'm just curious what you would say here. You had mentioned earlier that training people for ministry, for whatever role in ministry it is appropriate for someone to be in. If someone has those gifts, we in church leadership positions are spiritually obligated to train them to be able to appropriately apply those gifts.
Yes.
And so you had mentioned that we don't do that, or it seems like maybe we don't do that as much now as we did in the past. My question is, why do you think that is? Before you get to your answer, though, I'll kind of stall and let you maybe formulate your answer. 3 points, all of which start with the same letter. I'll ask.
Give me the letter.
Yeah.
I'll mention that I grew up in a very warm and loving church that had a really good basis in teaching the Bible as kind of the full story of God's work in the world, and not as, here are these things that you need to do, and that is the sum and substance of our faith. If you commit to these, whether you want to call them, steps or whatever, if you can just do these things, then you're good. And then that's it. I grew up in a church that actually, heard about the Holy Spirit. We heard about grace, and and have a fond memory of elders and things like that. However, I know of 2 other men who are in congregational ministry, some full-time congregational ministry setting. If I'm missing someone, then I apologize. But I know 3 total, myself included in that. And I have asked them, do you remember a specific time where somebody at that church said, hey, you have a gift for this. I'm urging you to go pursue this. And they couldn't remember specifics. Now, there's a range there. One of them is 40. The other one is, I think, in his mid to late 20s, and I'm 37. So we kind of are spaced out fairly evenly there. And none of us can remember a specific time where one person or a group of people, regularly encouraged us to pursue this. Now, once we had expressed interest, then they were encouraging. But the initiative, I think, was ours. And it just surprises me with the church as warm and loving as I grew up. And my folks are still there. My oldest brother's a deacon there. But John, you had mentioned that we don't do that as much. Let me ask, why do you think we don't do that as much?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's what I'm here for, to ask great questions.
Nailed it.
Anecdotally, certainly I don't have a lot of expertise in maybe a higher sociological question, why the philosophy of churches have changed. I could take a stab at it, and I would say,
Sure.
I think that we've lost a little bit of confidence. I think that there was a lot of fervor in our fellowship in the past that doesn't exist now to the level that it did.
Mm-hmm.
And consequently, I think there's something about that has bred maybe some apathy into putting people into a ministry within a church, and specifically within churches of Christ. And I'm of the opinion that Church of Christ is not perfect. We have a
Hot
lot.
takes coming in fast here.
Church of Christ not perfect. We have made a lot of mistakes, and even still continue to make a lot of mistakes. But I believe the Church of Christ has something to offer the world that is beautiful and right and lovely and of God. And so, if for no other reason, I believe that there is some opportunity there to put people in the ministry within our fellowship. The other thing that I would say, and this is certainly, I think, by and large, true of anything, you got to be really intentional to train people in that way.
Yeah.
It's not just going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It takes somebody with the mind to say, I want to train people. How am I going to do that? And what we did is just one way to do it. It's not a perfect way. It's just one of many. I'll say of my own experience, I think God nudges people, leads people, calls people. I think the Spirit convicts us, and I think by and large, if there is somebody at Collegeside who felt called, equipped to ministry, I think God could get that done without our help.
Sure.
And I think that a Christian university would be a great way. If that person went to a Christian university, certainly there are going to be professors and theologians that, nourish their soul and push them into ministry. But I think the church has a unique place in the training of leadership that Christian institutions cannot imitate.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot replicate.
Nor is it their prerogative, right? It's not their prerogative
exactly
to replace
that's
the local
exactly
congregation.
Right. Church leadership, ministry, teaching, whatever it is for the body. It's not isolated. It's not for the academy primarily.
Yeah.
It's for the body. And so what better place to learn how to translate ministry than in a church body?
Yeah.
And so I think church bodies have, by and large, allowed Christian institutions to do all of the training when there needs to be a partnership. There are things that, institutions can do that churches are not equipped to do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's got to be a partnership. And it seems as though, and this is just anecdotal, my own experience, it seems as though there's a little distrust between churches and institutions that kind of cuts both ways at different points in time to the detriment of us both.
Yeah, I can see that, and thankfully I know of exceptions to that, but I see that. See that. Matt, what do you think, man?
Just listening to John, I'm with them. I agree with them on what he's talking about. I think also we've lost an ability to expect things out of people, right? And so when growing up, there was in some churches, there's an expectation, right, that you have a gift and you're going to serve and you're going to use it. And it seems like we're afraid to ask anybody to do anything, and we're afraid to call anybody to anything. And that hurts the body, but it also hurts
because that's not my job, right?
Right. And
sorry to interrupt.
So I think there's something to putting some expectation on our young people and saying, hey, you have a gift. You need to use it and you need to serve. One of the things that we told our Proclaim students over the 3 or 4 days we were together was every one of you loves to teach. You just don't know it yet. And we wanted them to view what they were doing through that lens of every one of you loves scripture and you may not know it yet, right? And once they found that out, they did. We had a student the very last night who stood up in front of everybody that was there, and he said, "I love to teach the Bible, and I didn't know it."
Praise God.
Yeah. And so, but if we don't expect anything out of people, they're not going to know it, right? Yeah. And so, one of the things I think that we are striving and seeking to do here is to place some expectation, not pressure, but some expectation on our people that, listen, every one of you's got a gift. Every one of you can use it. Every one of you can serve. And the Lord expects you to. That's why he gave it to you, and we can't be afraid of that.
I had the opportunity to speak at Harding's lectureship this year at the end of September. And the topic that was assigned to me was out of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. My title was Becoming a Spiritual People, Discipleship for Unity. And, I kind of walked through the context of where Paul's coming from. And in the midst of talking about, the establishment of the church at Corinth and what kind of town it was and how that might have how the cultural values of a Roman colony of Corinth might have infiltrated some of how the Christian converts there were interacting with each other, largely negatively. In the midst of that, I was interspersing anecdotes from a friend of mine here at church who has no formal training in Bible, recovering drug and alcohol and gambling addict, tattoos everywhere, and is just absolutely on fire for the Lord, and is helping us bring in people who are in need of recovery, and and I think he and I are like 3 weeks apart difference in age, and it's just a delight to talk to him. And I kind of balanced off his gifts and my gifts and all that, and got down to the to the real meat of the issue, which was, if I'm in a position in a church where it's my duty or my prerogative to find places to put people in so they can exercise their gifts, then I'm spiritually obligated. I have a sacred duty to do that. And different churches are going to look different in who gets to go where, but with whatever is appropriate at my church, I need to find people to use their gifts in those ways. And that has been a fun challenge here. And it sounds like Proclaim is a way where maybe Collegeside as an individual congregation, or wherever these guys fan out over the years as they move, maybe they will they'll have kind of a taste of that and get to experience some of that as well. Let me ask this question. One that I didn't plan to ask y'all, but I gave you fair warning ahead of time that I'm going to burn on you relentlessly and ask tons of gotcha questions and
Yes,
and just
yes.
and really try to mess with y'all as much as I can. What are the things that you look for when you see somebody that you think might have potential for ministry or might be called for ministry? What are some things that you find that are consistent in folks like that, and you kind of look for those and think, okay, that seems like maybe this person needs to look at going into ministry? I'm curious.
That's a great question. You're asked such great questions, Kevin.
I've been podcasting
so
now for a year and a half, and
Because you're a
Yeah.
doctor,
I
man.
started off on a good foot back in March of 2021 with John Nichols. It's my first
That's
podcast
right.
guest, and I'm here again. So glad.
I think it's because you're a doctor.
That is, I did
Sure.
have to actually learn how to ask good questions, but that came through just relentlessly tearing apart all the bad Bible class lessons I taught.
No, man.
Those poor
Same.
people at White Station Church of Christ in Memphis and Nicholasville Church of Christ in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Those poor people suffered through so many bad Bible classes to where now
Yeah.
I actually ask decent questions here in Texas.
I think about the times that I preached in the past and am appalled.
Oh,
Yeah.
and trust me, my brother
It's
has
tough.
told me about every single one of those.
Yeah, I'm sure he
kidding.
has. I'm sure he has, and I have no doubt about that. No, it's a great question. I really don't know how to answer it, and here's why. Because I think we all take different paths,
That's fair.
and so I would never write off. And I know, I mean, you wouldn't. None of us would. I would never write off even formal ministry, vocational ministry from somebody who didn't do what we asked them to do. God can do that. Other people can do that. I think, though, to answer your question, the thing that I would look for, and maybe the only thing that I would look for in terms of, okay, let's continue to work with this person, is somebody who says yes. Just somebody who says yes. It's not about character. It's not about character for us, because without Christ, we're nothing. Certainly, as a teenager, it's not about character. It's not about perfection. It's not about public speaking. It's not about all of that. It's about the ability, or the willingness to say yes.
Yeah.
And so if we say, hey, will you read? Hey, will you serve? Hey, will you be an usher? Hey, will you come to proclaim? Hey, will you go with us, wherever we're going? If they say yes, then we're going to keep pouring into them. If they say no, I'm certainly not going to write them off.
Right.
And we're going to keep asking. But the kids who say yes, those are the kids that we're going to keep looking at and saying, okay, there may be something there for full-time ministry.
Yeah, makes sense. Man.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing that John said. In my head before John answered, what I was thinking about was, once somebody's presenting with the opportunity, the kids that show legitimate interest, are you can keep working with clearly, and we don't want to. There are plenty of people who are in ministry who didn't say yes the first time, right? And so I think that, and then I think there's kind of a even for the ones that might say no, but especially the ones that say yes, there's kind of a it when you see it part of it too, that you can't quantify about it. I remember specifically in there was a group setting we were in when I was in high school, and we had to go around and tell what we were good at. And I didn't have an answer. I had no answer. And so it got to me, and I was like, "What are you good at?" And I was there, just just existing, And my preacher gave the answer for me, because he saw it in me, and I didn't see it myself. I wasn't ready to say yes,
Yeah.
And he answered the question for me, and I'll never forget it, And to this day, if somebody asked me that question, that's one of the things I would say, because I was told that I was good at that, and I leaned into it, And so I think that, part of that is you kind of got to know it when you see it, and you kind of got to tell people when they don't see it, you
Yeah.
know. And so I don't know that there's a great quantifiable answer there. Maybe just a big conglomeration of things.
Can I add one thing, Kevin?
Of course.
I would say, just for the purpose of anybody listening, or just to get this out there, when we say teaching, we certainly mean the public proclamation of the word, preaching,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I told Matt, my vision, my hope for Proclaim is that one of these young men, or a group of these young men, are the ones who speak at my funeral someday.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope. That's what I.
Yeah.
But the truth is, lest somebody say, "Oh, you're forcing all these guys to preach, and who are you? Only God, does that." That's true. It's true. But there are a lot of needs when it comes to teaching. We need people to teach Bible class.
Yeah.
We need dads
Mm-hmm.
who are willing to do devotionals for Sunday nights when youth group comes over. We need people, women, men, we need people who can share in a public way. One of the speakers that we took the boys to at Proclaim made a really good point that I hadn't thought. And he told them, regardless of what you do, if you have the ability to stand up in front of a group and say something, you're going to be blessed because of that.
Yeah.
If you have the ability to do public speaking, if you have the willingness to just stand up and talk, I don't know. It seems as though there may be less of a desire to do that now than there used to be. And I know it was always the number one fear that people had, or whatever. But people who are willing in their workplaces, in corporate America, to stand up and talk with some confidence and with some ability, they're going to benefit from that.
Yeah.
And so we want to redeem that and plant that in the church. And so, teaching is not just preaching for us. It is that, but it's more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like we've been saying in different ways here for the last several minutes, it's incumbent upon us to find ways to help our young people use their God-given gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, as we wrap up this morning, some final takeaways, anything that that you might have thought, hey, I need to mention that, and then didn't get to, closes out here.
I would just say, keep going, wherever you are. Proclaim for us has been a major milestone, and we will continue to adapt and change. We're going to do the same thing, we hope, with young women in our church at some point in the future. We've got to figure out exactly what that looks like and navigate all of that. But we want our young women to know that they're valued and that there are so many ways to serve. And so say yes. I think that's what I would end on. I think we have had to say yes. Initially, we talked about Proclaim, and we talked about doing it next year or after, when we were quote ready. And we just kind of threw it against the wall this summer, and God blessed it. And so I felt called. I felt like God wanted that to happen. And so say yes. He'll meet you there, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about our young man.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. If there's one thing to leave with, it's that our young people will rise to the level of their expectations, and they do, and
Mhm.
it's okay to put something in front of them and say, "Go get it," because they can.
Yeah.
And our young people are at Collegeside. They're special, but they're not any different than anybody else. And so, if we expect our young people to use their gifts and to know what their gifts are, or if we want that from them, then we need to communicate that to them. And so my encouragement would be to put that on your people, because they can rise to meet it, and they will, and they love it.
Yeah.
Even if they don't know it yet, they love it. And so thank you for letting us talk about it. It was a great thing for us, and something we're looking forward to doing in the future as well.
Definitely. I've seen it true in my life, especially in my ministry, that a lot of times God, if you are saying yes to God, he will push you into something that you do not feel ready for.
Mm.
Probably because when you feel ready for it, the moment is gone, the time has passed.
Yeah.
And a lot of times he's just, nope, all right, here you go, you got to do it. If you're saying yes, now's the time, jump in there.
What did the prophet say? He shares his glory with no other.
Indeed.
And so when we're ready, he receives less glory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Say yes.
Yeah. Guys, I really appreciate the time this morning. Hope you'll have a good rest of the day, okay?
Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Do, brother.